Hey everyone, this is Miss Heath with your done 2020 version of the Fireside chat. I have here my timeless Fireside IKEA lamp here to give warmth and comfort through this strange and difficult time in which we are all forced to combat a global pandemic, but more importantly, learn about the 1930s. So what I'm doing here is making a quick overview video of the New Deal, which is the 1930s. It's chapter 21, the chapter you're making. Hopefully this video will clarify some questions that you have and help you with your review sheets. Since the best part of class, which is you guys, are not here right now, and I'm stuck talking to myself in this little computer box, I thought that a really nice way to do this would just be for me to act out your guys' part. So, for instance, Bianca would be like, hey, Miss Heath, why do you keep using me for examples? And I'd be like, Bianca, it's because you're my favorite. And also, I will be using other people for examples for the rest of this video. Like you, Uli, or if you're not careful, and you start sort of dozing off, you'll end up like Taj on my slideshow. Hopefully there's a split screen here that will show Taj. So this is going to be overview on chapter 21. Here's our quick recap of where we are in US history. We watched this country grow from a little rebellious youth pushing against Mother England, defining its own boundaries, its own rules. It struggled to create its own constitution. That was an angsty time, not as bad as when we got trapped in that terrible relationship in which our philosophical underpinnings were deeply at odds with each other, or deeply at odds between the North and the South, and boom, Civil War, big divorce, we get back together, things are a little shaky, liberty is expanding and retracting. Then we get to the 1920s, which we talked about last week, and 1920s is, we've hit our midlife crisis. We are spending and recklessly speculating. This is when Dad buys that new Ferrari, and everyone's kind of like, Dad, do you have the money to buy that Ferrari? And Dad's like, oh, no problem. I put it on the credit card. And there's no way that money is going to run out, which is actually what they thought in the 1920s. They thought the stock market was just going to increase forever. As we know, that boom quickly turns to bust. This period of time, the 1930s that we're entering into, is now Dad's going to have to figure out not just how to pay for that Ferrari that he didn't have the money for, so he's broke, but he has to pay off this debt. So dealing with the repercussions of reckless spending, which of course is not the only cause of the Great Depression. We'll get into that in a little bit, but also how is he gonna restructure his whole life and all of his finances such that he doesn't do this again? And that's where we're gonna get with the US. We're gonna sort of see how does depression create the circumstances in which the government becomes an energized and incredibly powerful force, an active force in the economy. So this leads us into one of our most fun sections of US history, where I run up to the whiteboard and say, all right, throw out some tensions from this time period. And then you all go, and I can't hear anyone very clearly. And then, maybe David from the back of class is like, oh yeah, North and South. And then I'm like, oh yeah, North and South. And we get into all of these different tensions. If I were you, this would be a great time to engage in that interactive learning. Press pause, think about what tensions there are carrying over, maybe even from that Scopes trial thesis statement that you wrote from the 1920s that are maybe going to emerge in the 1930s. Or if you're like me and you just can't remember without David's help, maybe phone a friend like I did a few hours ago.
Well, definitely sectionalism
Yeah,
will still
nice.
play a big part.
That's
of
a great
it.
one.
Well,
North versus South.
Yeah, in the scope trial, they're talking about stereotype of New York, Chicago being the most criminals cities.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rural areas versus city areas. The
Yeah.
manufacturer versus
Okay.
farming. The farmers versus
Yeah. Great,
the
David.
workers class.
David's crushing it. You've helped all of your classmates.
Thank
per
you
usual.
very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So David gave us some good foundations, that rural versus urban, north versus south. He also mentioned, I believe, Catholic versus Protestant. These are some tensions that are going to continue into the 1930s, but really they're going to be strangely reconciled under our president, our main man, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Some things I'd add to David's list. The big question is, how is Dad going to make sure that he can recover from having bought all these cars and not having money for them? So how is he going to recover, and also how is he going to make sure this doesn't happen again? And so the big tension I would point out is strong central government versus a weak central government. Are we going to have a robust national government making policies about the economy in a way we haven't seen before? Or are we going to have sort of what we've had before, which is the government stay out of things? So the other thing is, another economic tension is that communism to capitalism spectrum. We're going to see voices for both. But in this time of economic downturn, actually, there's going to be a rise of socialism and communism, of workers' unions. And that brings us to another tension we always think about, employer versus employee. Two more I would add. The classic tension in the US, the one that's never going to go away, even when it looks like it's not there. As we saw in the Scopes trial, it was there, right? Racial tension. We're going to see a number of minorities and how they're treated differently in the New Deal. So African Americans, Native Americans, Mexican immigrants. The other group who's going to get the bad end of the New Deal is women. So these are some of our orienting tensions, and these are things that you want to be thinking about as you're reading through your chapter, as you're completing your view sheet. How does this particular incident relate to those bigger tensions? And so now let's get into some of the specifics of how those play out. So we have FDR coming in, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. And he creates something called the New Deal, which is basically the government coming in and spending a huge amount of money to help bolster the economy. You might, if you've been reading the news, recognize this strategy as something that's going on right now with the response to the stock market collapse because of coronavirus, which we talked about a little bit in class, and which has gotten, unfortunately, a lot worse since we talked in class. So something to think about is, here is, can you guess just in your mind right now how much money FDR spent on the New Deal? And then Jules is like, $100. Sorry, Jules, that's not your voice. It was $41.7 billion is about how much they spent in the 1930s. And that, in 2009 money, so in our current currency, is about $650 billion trying to help recover the economy. So the outline of this new package that the current administration and Congress just passed in response to coronavirus calls for $1 trillion, about $150 billion of which is going to go to loans, $50 billion which is going to help airlines, which are not flying, and then $300 billion are going to small businesses. It's worth thinking, if you're going to especially do that extra credit assignment in which I asked you to compare the 2020 to the 1920s, and I'm extending it to the early 30s, is how might, even with this $1 trillion package, how that's going to give money to airlines and give loans and give money to refurbish small businesses that are going out of business in this time of coronavirus, how might this package differ from the kinds of New Deal packages that were going to make public works programs, that were going to put people to work, that were going to get people in soup kitchens, that were going to get people doing art. How might those New Deal platforms differ from the platforms suggested by the that are going to be supported in this coronavirus relief package, simply because even though you could give me as much money as you want and you might not be able to get me to go out to the grocery store to buy, or to a local business or to a local restaurant to buy food, because there's now this threat of pandemic in a way that there wasn't that threat in the New Deal. In the New Deal, getting people out and going to restaurants and buying stuff and seeing art, that was ideal. And now we have this sort of complicated situation. So that's something to think about as we sort of navigate the past as it overlaps with our present. Quick update, the reason I'm in a different sort of outfit and time is because these are sort of live updates, but as of 5:40 on Sunday, that package failed to pass the Senate. So just to give you an update. Okay, let's get back to the New Deal, though. And the New Deal is going to be important because it signifies a shift in the role of the government in the economy. So on that central power scale, centralized power, does the national government have a lot of power or a little? It's going to become a much more robust, much more involved power in the economy. And its role is now going to be to ensure the economic security of its citizens. This is where Tanya's eyes light up and she's like, wait, you mean kind of like the 14th Amendment? And I'm like, interesting point, Tanya. Why do you say that FDR's New Deal would be kind of like the 14th Amendment? And then Tanya would say, well, it's just that the 14th Amendment shifts the role of the federal government from a potential violator of citizens' civil rights to a protector of minorities' rights. It's interesting because the language you use, Miss Heath, around the shift in the role of the government in FDR's New Deal is that now the federal government becomes a protector of every citizen's economic rights or economic security. And then I cut Tanya off because Tanya's totally right, per usual. And I'm like, Mika and Oliver, did you hear what Tanya just said? And Mika and Oliver sort of look at each other and they go, yeah, actually Tanya said that the 14th Amendment is like FDR's New Deal. And Oliver even contributes something new. And he says, maybe the 14th Amendment made the government the protector in the political realm of our SEP&C. Now, FDR's New Deal makes the government the protector in our economic realm. The government is now going to regulate things like agricultural production. It's going to regulate relationships between employers and employees, and for the first time, be on the side of the employees, be on the side of labor. It's going to regulate the stock market with things like the FDIC and the Glass-Steagall Act. It's going to loan money and insure banks. So now it's involved in the banking system very actively. It's going to embed itself in the economic system. It's going to create physical infrastructure, so dams and highways. In the New Deal, one of the forces behind the creation of San Marcos Pass in Santa Ynez Valley, as well as the beloved and universally known murals at Santa Ynez High. I know you are all really concerned with the murals at Santa Ynez High. It's also going to shift the role of the government to be concerned with economic welfare of its citizens. And this is seen as in something like this new welfare state where the government gives unemployment benefits or old age pensions under the Social Security Act, things that we still have today. And beside giving us a whole lot of bridges, the New Deal also gives us the classic AWLOA, a whole lot of acronyms. Boo. Yeah, but Miss Heath, you keep talking about the New Deal as one thing, but isn't it like 2 parts? Yes, Cody. Good point. It does give us 2 parts. So generally we split the New Deal into First New Deal, Second New Deal. First New Deal referring to policies between 1933 and 34. The Second New Deal between 35 and 36. And then we split those reforms up even more into 3 categories. And those are the ones that are on your review sheet. So this might be helpful. John Green goes over this a little bit, but I'll say it again here in a less charming and more wordy way. Relief, recovery, and reform. So relief and recovery are going to be the things that we'll see more in that First New Deal. Stuff like, so relief being immediate action taken to slow the deterioration of the economy. So stuff like the Emergency Banking Act, which calls for a 4-day bank holiday. This one was passed the day after his inauguration. He was like, basically, we're shutting down all the banks and also the government's in charge, and also no more of that gold standard. We are going to paper currency fully. If we compare the Great Depression to Miss Heath's great ankle sprain of 2020, we'd say the relief moment is Miss Heath leaning on her desk after she has just popped her ankle out, and all of her students saying, Miss Heath, let's get you to the, let's make sure you can stand up. Then we have relief, which is sort of temporary programs meant to restart the economy a little bit. So this is going to be something like the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which basically it says, all right, farmers, you guys have too much supply and there's not enough demand, so we're going to cut down the amount that you can farm. We're going to cut down your fields. This is in hopes of making it so that there's less supply, and so that then their crops can be worth more. The problem is all the people working on the land, right, sharecroppers, who are generally African American, right, are going to be out of jobs. So that's one thing to be thinking about with that AAA. But the whole point of the AAA is to sort of start to get some recovery in there. There's also the Public Works Administration, which basically hires a bunch of people to build stuff, like bridges and acronyms. Just kidding, just bridges, but also other stuff like dams. And the Golden Gate Bridge is going to be an example of something that comes from the Public Works Administration. And maybe it's that boot time when I'm was hobbling around on that boot. Hopefully we have some of our soccer crutch girls out there who are in that recovery phase. Thinking of you, Malia and Pirelli. And then the third part, reform. These are permanent programs that are supposed to prevent other depressions. So this is that dad's giving someone his checkbook so they can regulate his finances for him so he doesn't keep buying Ferraris, and also make sure that people are have a stable sense of economic security. And this is going to be something like the Fair Labor Standards Act, classic FLSA, which will make minimum wage and maximum working hours and limit child labor. So in the Emma Heath ankle scenario, this is Miss Heath wearing a brace on her ankle. Every day she teaches for the rest of her life to ensure that no excited whiteboard movement creates the situation for a torn ankle. One significant difference between that first and second New Deal is that the first one is going to be a little more concerned with the relief and recovery, though of course these are all sort of fluid, and the relief and recovery are all sort of intertwined, and even sort of some of the reform is similar. So this is just sort of basic structure to help you, but that second New Deal is really a product of all of these workers' unions uniting, and a huge labor movement, and push for the sort of people's rights, and infusing the economy from the sort of common man up. So not bailing out banks, but giving jobs to people. And this is, from that comes things like the WPA, or the Works Project Administration, which funds a huge amount of culture and arts and there's sort of a thriving artistic output, both like musically. This is the first time many people see opera or theater. It's photography. We'll have another little video on that in a few days, so keep an eye out. The whole idea of the welfare state, right? Social Security and the Social Security Act, which we talked a little bit about before, where the Wagner Act, which regulates the relationship between employers and employees, and comes in, and the Fair Labor Standards Act, which regulates the minimum wage and the maximum hours. So again, these are going to be sort of long-term, long-lasting effects of the New Deal. So, other than acronyms, FDR and the New Deal give us our favorite thing, which is a new definition of new words. Woo! It's like one of those things where I keep blinking and forgetting what the words are. If only I had someone to help me.
Liberalism, Liberty, and New Deal Coalition.
Thanks, remote Stella. New definitions of, importantly, of liberalism, of liberty, and
New Deal Coalition.
So, let's talk about liberalism. Before, liberalism is this idea that comes from classical liberalism, which is this focus on rationality, and as we know, sort of comes from Enlightenment ideals. It turns into a conservative, a sort of conservative argument in the 20s for limited government, free market capitalism, hands-off, laissez-faire, that liberty of contract, that if you sign that contract with your employer, that is a fair deal and the government's not going to help. And this is what happens basically throughout the 20s. We have Harding and Coolidge and even Hoover are, for the most part, hands-off. The economy will run itself. And that's the standard thought. Now, liberalism, as we know it today, this moment in history is when it shifts to this new idea of an active and modernized government, a national government that regulates the economy, a government that is now in favor of labor. So if you think about it, in the past, when we think about people who are fighting for workers' rights, we think about someone like Eugene Debs or Charles Schenck, or even the whole labor union IWW, right? All of these groups and people are sort of systematically suppressed. And now the government's like, okay, actually I think I'll be on the side of the labor unions. And that's going to be a big deal in pushing FDR toward the new Democratic Party, this new Democratic coalition that involves socialists, that involves intellectuals, that involves workers' unions. And then there's this new idea of liberty. And this is where FDR is a public relations master. This is something that both liberalism and liberty are things that he coins, terms that he coins and redefines in his Fireside chats. Now, he didn't have the nice, warm, personal aura of the IKEA lamp, but he did have a soothing voice, right? So he's going to use the radio, this new media that came up in medium, that came up in the 1920s, to communicate messages not simply about his policies, though also about his policies, but to communicate directly with citizens more on an emotional level. And so in these Fireside chats, he coins that term liberalism. He flips it to mean what it means today, a liberal, someone who believes in government involvement in the economy, someone who believes in helping out unemployed workers, someone who believes in giving pensions to retired workers. He also coins this new definition of liberty, individual freedom as economic security, something that hadn't been really considered before. So he says now the role of the government is to guarantee economic security, and this is that thing about the shift in the role of the government, and it's also could not be more apt today, of that the greatest threat to freedom is economic instability. And that's an idea that FDR cultivates in these fireside chats. And part of the reason FDR was so effective at this time was because he was able to speak to people's emotions, and he was able to target this sort of underlying feeling of society during the Depression, not just speak to his policies. But don't let me tell you that. Let's just talk to him himself.
This is the inaugural speech. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory. The nation asks for action, and action now. Our greatest primary task is to put people to work. This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by directing recruiting by the government itself, treating the task as we would treat the emergency of a war, but at the same time, through this employment, accomplishing greatly needed projects to stimulate and reorganize the use of our national resources. In the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis, broad executive power, to wage a war against the emergency, as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
That was from real footage, by the way. I know, it's really high quality. From his first inaugural address. And his inaugural address, right, he's talking about, he has some things about the economy itself, but really he's addressing this feeling of panic and this feeling of fear. And he knows the thing that we all know from studying U.S. history, that when panic comes up, when mass hysteria arises, right, nothing good happens to the United States. And so he's trying to address this issue of trust in the government. And that's what the Fireside Chat's going to be about. That's what his whole presidency is going to be about, is instilling a sense of confidence in the people, reinforcing the sense that government is something to be trusted. And here is a little snippet from his first Fireside Chat.
After all, there is an element in the readjustment of our financial system more important than currency, more important than gold, and that is the confidence of the people themselves. Confidence and courage are the essentials of success in carrying out our plan. You people must have faith. You must not be stampeded by rumors or guesses. Let us unite in banishing fear. We've provided the machinery to restore our financial system, and it is up to you to support and make it work. It is your problem, my friends, your problem no less than it is mine. Together, we cannot fail.
This redefinition of those two terms,
Liberalism
and
Liberty,
is going to be successful in also it's going to shift the nature of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is going to form
New Deal coalition.
the New Deal coalition. FDR's sort of rhetorical appeals and his policies that aim to help the common man, but also infuse a huge amount of money into the economy, are going to reconcile divides that David was talking about earlier on, right? So people, both black workers in the North and white supremacist Democrats in the South, are going to be a part of this coalition. We're going to have Protestant farmers and urban Catholics. Also, Jews are going to be more included in this time in this New Deal coalition. We'll have industrial workers and middle-class homeowners. We'll have intellectuals and socialists, and that CIO, that Congress of Industrial Workers. So labor unions, right, are now entangled with government, are now working hand in hand with government. And all of these are going to come together to form the New Deal coalition, which is going to form the new basis of the Democratic Party, which will last until the 1960s. Ms. Heath, this sounds great. It sounds like the New Deal is both attempting to address economic woes, putting in a huge amount of infrastructure for the government to be a powerful force in the economy in the future, makes the economic security of everyday people a priority for the national government in the way it never was before, is somehow inclusive of both Black Northerners and white Southerners. Ooh, sounds too good to be true. And it is. And now I would challenge you to guess who is going to benefit and who is going to actually have their liberty limited in this time of great reform. I can already hear Sydney's voice. It's already cut in, and it's saying women, Black people, Native people, Mexican immigrants are going to face severe limitations on their freedom and actually not get the benefits that they're promised. This applies to the government aid and the attention in the crisis we're experiencing right now. One of the articles I'm linking is about how coronavirus and the crash of the stock market could be a great blow to feminism across the world. The other article I'm linking is about responses to Hurricane Katrina, comparing them with this current crash and how minority communities were disproportionately treated differently rhetorically by the media, and also given different kinds of aid. Which is to say, right, be on the lookout for these as patterns that emerge in history. When someone's giving aid to the common man, again, who is that including and who's that excluding? And so actually all of next week is really us digging into particularly the experience of African Americans and women of all ethnicities and races, and sort of unearthing all of the various limitations on their freedom during this time. One thing I want you guys to be thinking about while we go through next week in these, you're going to have 2 readings and 2 discussion threads. On Monday, you're just watching a little video on FDR, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, you'll be reading and responding to secondary and primary sources. One thing I want you to keep in mind is this context for these documents. FDR puts on his cabinet the first female cabinet member. He has Eleanor Roosevelt, this symbol of feminism, this symbol of feminine, of a woman who is very powerful both politically and socially, who's involved in politics, who makes her own speeches, who disagrees with her husband on certain policies, and also we have Mary McLeod Bethune, the first African American woman to serve on a cabinet. She serves as the head of the Federal Council on Negro Affairs, which is one of those ID terms that you have, the Black Cabinet. So these are Black advisors to FDR. This is an unofficial term that she uses. But both of these things sort of signal to the public, hey, FDR is a progressive guy. He is someone who's going to accept you if you're a minority, if you're a Black person, if you're a woman. He puts those people on his cabinet. He must be thinking about you. And it's just enough to get those people on his side and to get them voting for him in that New Deal coalition. The thing I want us to be thinking about while we go into next week is how these policies actually are really, in the meat of them, targeted to please the white Southern Democrats who are largely white supremacists, and how these policies disproportionately have ill effects on these communities of color and these women. And that's what our whole week is going to be focused on. So as we chart our SEP and C, as we chart our tensions, we are going to also be thinking about those expansions of liberty and the constrictions of liberty. I hope that this video has been helpful in sort of going over some of these things and putting them in language from class. I'm super open to feedback about how this video might be improved, shorter, longer. I think maybe we'll try to do some shorter videos later on. I also welcome questions. Both classes have a discussions question thread that I'm asking you to ask a question and answer a question, and at least once or twice by Wednesday. This will just get our conversation flowing, and I will be able to make another video, hopefully, or at least an announcement that responds to some of these questions before you have to write some sort of final or bigger assessment on Friday, like a relationship ID.